My name is Francisco. I'm 25 years old and I live on my family's farm, helping to take care of it when my parents are out of town. It's just a small family farm, not commercial or anything like that. My parents want me to inherit it when they can no longer manage it, since I'm the oldest of 3 siblings and the only son. But honestly, I'm not too keen on the idea. I can't see myself staying in rural Arkansas for my entire life, especially after something really strange happened last July. My parents were on a romantic trip for a week, so my 2 sisters, Maria and Sophia, and I were looking after the property while they were away. It's quite secluded here, a lot of privacy, perhaps too much in my opinion. However, that night everything changed. It began late in the evening as we were getting ready to go to bed. Maria was in her room taking online summer courses, and Sophia and I were watching a silly series in the living room. All 3 of us wanted to leave the farm life behind, especially me, since I'm the oldest and in the prime of my life. One of the most dreaded parts of farm life is the predators, not just the animals that eat your crops, but also the people who come to steal. You might not believe it, but it happens. It hasn't happened to us many times, but it does happen. We keep some weapons in the house for this very reason. Suddenly, our 2 dogs outside started going crazy in the backyard. Something scared them. I ran outside to see what they were barking at. Both dogs were staring at the crops, barking like mad. I shouted at them to be quiet, and they fell silent. I approached the crops and heard a whistle from within the cornfield, a definitely human whistle. It was the first time I encountered an intruder on the property without my father being there. I had to run inside to grab one of the guns. The dog started barking again. I told my sisters that someone was outside in the cornfield and that I had to scare them off. Both said it was a terrible idea to go into the cornfield in the dark and made me see that they were right. I also realized how terrifying it would be. Instead, I went back to the backyard where the dogs were still barking towards the crops. I aimed the gun into the air and fired a shot that echoed through the night, silencing the dogs. At that moment, I felt powerful and yelled as loud as I could for the intruder to get off our land before going back inside. My sisters laughed, which made me laugh too, but our laughter soon stopped because the dogs went crazy again, this time even more so. I ran out again, ready to do the same, but my heart skipped a beat when I saw a man about 20 feet from the dogs, just in front of the cornfield. He looked at me and I yelled at him, at which point he ran into the cornfield. I started to run towards it and fired another shot into the air. I stopped next to the dogs. I had no intention of going in there. I also wasn't going to leave the dogs outside, so I unhooked their leashes and took them inside the house. I told my sisters that someone was lurking around the cornfield. So, what did we do? We called Dad. He told me I had to be the man of the house and protect my sisters. He recommended firing another warning shot if the intruder returned. After that, we all went to our respective rooms. My sisters took the dogs with them and I brought the gun to my room because we were all a bit scared. I left the window open, and while I was lying down watching a movie on my laptop, I heard a whistle from outside. I rushed to the window and saw someone walking slowly across the lawn. Then, as if he had a 6th sense, he stopped and looked up at my window, still whistling. This guy was obviously trying to scare us and pull off some kind of horror prank, which was a pretty stupid idea considering I had already made it clear that I had a gun. I ran to grab the gun from my bed and aimed it out the window. I fired at the grass a few meters away from him, clearly not intending to hurt him. This ended his little horror movie act, and he ran out of sight from my window towards the front of the house. This time he did not come back. He would have to be a fool to return after that. Obviously, I told my sisters why I fired and assured them that he wouldn't come back. We never found out who it was or why he did it. It could have been a teenager or several teenagers trying to scare some innocent farmers for fun, or it could have been someone genuinely dangerous. My wife Carmen and I own a farm in Buckinghawa where we mainly grow corn. This happened in August 2018 on a slightly rainy night. Carmen and I have spent our entire lives farming. It's really all we know. Of course, farm life in Iowa means lots of space and very few people. Our nearest neighbors, Jorge and Carlos, were each about half a mile away in opposite directions. They were also farmers, and there wasn't much else to do around here. It's easy to become friends with your neighbors. We often invited Jorge and Carlos and their wives over, and vice versa. On this otherwise normal night, we had Jorge and his wife over for drinks. We all got pretty drunk while playing board games, and they left around 11 p.m. Fortunately, their house was just a 30-second straight line away. We continued drinking wine while watching one of our favorite movies. We started to feel tired, and were definitely feeling the effects of the wine. We were probably going to fall asleep on the sofa cuddled up when there was a knock at the front door. A knock at that hour was unusual. In fact, it had never happened before. But along with the knocks, we thought we could hear a voice saying something. I turned down the volume of the TV and waited for it to happen again. About 20 seconds later, another set of knocks on the door, followed by a muffled voice saying, "We need help." I was about to get up and open the door when Carmen grabbed my arm and looked at me. She grimaced and shook her head. I whispered, "I'm just going to ask who it is." She replied, "We shouldn't let them know we're home, but they probably already know we are." I approached the door and asked, "Who is it?" The voice on the other side said through the door, "Oh, thank God, can you open? We're lost." I asked, "Who are you?" The voice replied, "My wife and I." I retorted, "Can your wife say something?" There was silence for a few seconds, then I said, "Did you hear me?" The same voice replied, "Yes, but she's not beside me right now." It was at that moment I started to feel alarm bells ringing, and I realized the voice sounded a bit strange, like a man trying to make his voice sound a bit higher. I laughed and said, "You're Jorge, aren't you?" Jorge is a big joker, and being drunk, it wouldn't be unusual for him to do something like this. The voice replied, "Yes," now with a slightly deeper voice. I almost felt relief, thinking it really was Jorge, but I still didn't want to open the door without confirming. Someone knocking on your door here, late at night, saying they're lost. It's not something that happens, it's not normal, and it's an immediate cause for alarm. I told them through the door, "Prove it. What's the name of your wife?" An unknown voice now replied, "That's a trick question." My smile disappeared. I went to fetch my phone and called Jorge. Carmen watched the whole situation and suggested we should call the police. I told her to wait. The phone rang 3 times before Jorge answered. I immediately asked him, "Are you at my front door right now?" He replied, "No, why?" I told him there was someone at our front door trying to trick me into opening it. He said he'd come over quickly, and we hung up. Keep in mind, we were all still drunk during this. There were more knocks at the door, and I shouted, "I have a shotgun waiting for you if you don't leave now." The voice replied, "We're just trying to use a phone, that's all we need." Carmen called 911, which, by the way, here in this place takes an extremely long time for an officer to arrive. We heard footsteps walking around our wooden porch that surrounds the house. Actually, several sets of footsteps. They stopped at one of our windows that had the blinds closed, and we heard one of them trying to lift the window. This made Carmen, who was still on the phone with 911, scream, "Leave us alone!" I also shouted at the top of my lungs that I would shoot them. It took me a moment to think about running upstairs to grab my shotgun from the closet. Literally seconds later, there were more knocks on the door, and this time it was Jorge's voice screaming, "Open up." I let in Jorge, who also brought his shotgun. He said he saw nothing and no one when he arrived. He stayed with us until a police officer came to the house, did a quick scan of the property with us, and then left. We took his advice and installed a camera at the front and back of the house, surprisingly something we had never thought of until this